Hello there guys. So, that's right, you've seen the title. I'm going to talk about it. It. And when I say it, that isn't me sort of saying, oh, this is the worst type of abuse, you know, physical abuse is so much less, or emotional is nothing, or cyber is, nothing like that. I'm just saying this is the one that everyone thinks of when they say I was abused when I was little. They think either physical or they think sexual, and that's wrong. But this is the one that people tiptoe around a bit, simply because despite the fact that it's no one's fault, there's a lot of shame, I think, around it, a lot of self-disgust, even if it's not your fault, because it's called abuse for a reason. And I have no bullet points on this video. I just was walking around the house thinking, and I suddenly thought I'm going to make a video about it. And I came in here and I sort of was like, okay, what am I going to do? Still in my pyjama top, and I just started recording. And so it's a difficult subject, to say the least. It's a very, very difficult subject. Because as I said, there is so much shame, there is so much self-disgust, and it can be a very, very triggering subject to just think about, let alone see a person talking about it. And so this could be a hard video for quite a few of you. It depends on how you're affected. I'm not going to be obviously talking about certain people's actual situations or experiences, so hopefully it won't trigger too much or trigger flashbacks or anything like that. But it might get you thinking on that direction, and so if you think this video could harm you in any way, please stop watching now. I may touch on other types of abuse. I'm not really sure what this video is going to be covering, except I know I'm going to take on the subject that so many people on here have told me that they have struggled with, not just girls. So basically I want to begin with the thing that's going to take up most of the video, which is obviously, it's not your fault. And there's so many of you right now, I bet, going, but it is, but it's not. Even if something happened and you enjoyed it or you wanted it to happen again, that in no way means that it wasn't abuse. In fact, in some ways I think that makes the abuse worse, because then you do have almost an excuse to blame yourself for something that you should never ever have to blame yourself for, because at the end of the day I think most people do wish that they'd never experienced it, even if they did like it. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying like as in, oh, I wish, you know, it's very hard. But what I mean is sometimes people can think that they don't regret it happening. They want it to happen again, but if they could make it so that it didn't happen in the first place, they would. Does that make any sense? Because it really screws things up. But in some ways, it makes people better. And it's excruciatingly painful to think of it in that way, but it is true, because I think some of the people that I've spoken to wouldn't be anywhere near as kind and decent and wonderful and helpful and just completely selfless if they weren't abused. That doesn't mean on any level that abuse is a good thing and that it somehow causes good characteristics in people. It's simply saying that sometimes you can turn the abuse around. You can make it so that it almost becomes a good thing. It will never be a good thing for you, but you can almost turn it around so that you can almost undo it. You can make it so that you overtook the abuser by not just not letting them defeat you, but you got to help other people, or you got to feel good about yourself despite that. Even better than if it never happened. In that way, you've beaten your abuser and you've given it some, you know. So in some ways, abuse, although it will always be terrible, it's some people walking down the street, I swear, they're iller than me, far, far iller than me, and they just get to walk the street. And the idea that you can turn something bad that happened around is beautiful and difficult, very, very difficult for most people. And I think also when people are abused, they think, oh, but someone else was abused worse. But the thing is, there's always someone who will have had worse. At the end of the day, a person who could have been abused every day of their lives will find someone who was abused worse. You're never going to be the worst. And then people say, yeah, but I was only looked at strangely or something like that. But the thing is, abuse is abuse. No matter what, even if it's a tiny thing that happened, and let's face it, nothing is tiny, it's about the way that it affects you. If it was something tiny and it affected you in a big way, that tiny thing becomes big. Also, a thing to remember about abuse is sometimes you remember it as worse than it is. You remember most stressful situations as worse than they are, believe it or not. It's I'm going to say the word, it's difficult very, very, very often, but it is difficult to kind of overcome that thought of it's difficult to overcome flashbacks when sometimes you remember it as worse than it was. And that doesn't mean that you remember it as different from what it was. It's a very difficult sort of line that you cross there. Because on some levels you think, oh well, if I'm remembering it as worse, then I must be remembering it wrong. But you may not be remembering it wrong. What I mean is, it may be almost affecting you worse in the future, recalling it, than at the time of it happening. And it's so tricky. He's so distracting. But there are several different types of sexual abuse as well. Some people, as I said, I'm not going to go into real situations, because there's, just like suicide, self-harm, and eating disorders, every single different type of mental illness you can possibly get, overdosing, it's completely different per person, and everyone has their own abuse experience if they are abused. But the sort of vague things with sexual abuse is, basically it can be in any way sexual abuse. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone touching a place that you don't want that to happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone making you do something or them doing something to you. It's very, very complicated. You can even have cyber sexual abuse, and people really blame themselves for that one. I'm sorry if you can't hear me. People really blame themselves for that one because they think that because it was cyber, they had, they sort of weren't forced into it. They weren't pushed, but really, I think if anyone is under 16 and that happens, it still counts as abuse. And even above that, they may feel disgusted with themselves, but they should never be disgusted with themselves, because it's something that I think I bit off more than I can chew with this video, didn't I? Basically, I just want to say it's no one's fault. Even if, for example, it's cyber, which everyone thinks is a tiny issue compared to the real thing, because I've spoken to a few people and it's happened, and it's still abuse, because if you're under the age of the other person and you don't really want to do it, then to me it still counts. Or it's even illegal. If you're under 16 and someone else is over 16, then that's definitely that person's fault, because they're older than you. They have that ability to think. They're not a child, you're a child. And then there's Stockholm syndrome, where people get attached to their abusers after it's happened, or after this is stopped, or sometimes when it's still going. They can almost want it, and they can almost miss it. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It's well known that that person almost gave them a comfort in distress, and it's such a difficult subject because of this, because no one enjoys physical abuse and things like that. But for example, even in physical abuse, this is something I can talk about quite openly. I want it to happen again. I actually do. Not sexual abuse, but physical abuse. I actually want it to happen again, because there's a comfort in it. I guess it's that someone cares enough about you even if it's in a horrible way. I mean, to hate someone, you have to care about them, because you have to care enough to hate them. And for someone to abuse you, they have to care enough to abuse you, even if it's by treating you like you don't exist. It's so complicated, but basically, in this horrible, horrible abuse that will just... I'm not going to say that it'll wreck your life, because you can take back your life. But it can tear you apart. It can. Even in this abuse that can tear you apart, you at least know that someone cared enough to do it to you, and they gave you their undivided attention. And it's sickening. It really is, but it's not sickening for you. You're not the sickening one, it's them. The fact that they've taken this away from you, and when I say taken this away from you, I mean they took a part of you. Because you're made up of every single bad experience and good experience. If you're a good person and you've had horrible experiences, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. You may think you're a terrible person, but if at the end of the day you're willing to help someone else, you're not a horrible person. And I know for sure that none of you are horrible people. This is murderously difficult to talk about. I should have done bullet points, some sort of list or something. I just want you to all stop blaming yourselves. None of this is your fault. It can happen to anyone. And the thing is, we all think we're invincible. Some people, they may hate themselves because for the rest of their lives they question, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I think this? Why didn't I scream? Why didn't I shout? Why didn't I tell someone? Why didn't I blah blah blah? But it's like, a month or two ago, I was talking to my friend, just a friend called Charlotte, who I used to go to school with. She lives up the road from me. She's my age. And we were in the park across the street at night, which is a place that I don't like to be, particularly at night, even though I've gone there at night, out my own, I don't know. Anyway, and I was starting to get a bit anxious because there were quite a few people just sort of going through, adults and maybe drunk people sometimes, going along the edge, and I was sort of going like that, and eventually she said, "Rachel, you look ridiculous." And I was like, okay, and I said, just be careful, you know, and I was starting to get worried about her by this point, and she said, I'm perfectly safe. And I said, what makes you think you're safe? And she goes, I've got... Shush! And she was like, I've got steel cap boots on. I was like, that doesn't mean you can fight anyone off. It's not as simple as that. And she just couldn't get her head around it, and she went, yeah, but there's two of us. And I said, we're two small girls. And she went, yeah, but you'd see people coming. I was like, yeah, but it's night time and we're in a park and there's no one around. Like, you always think you're invincible before it happens, and it's difficult to drill that into people, that it wouldn't have entered your mind. Why would it enter your mind? You couldn't have stopped it, even if you got a funny feeling or whatever, or, you know, either you were too young or you didn't know enough about it. You couldn't have figured that out, and you didn't know what it would feel like. You didn't know what would happen in the future. You didn't know how it would affect your life. You didn't know what this horrible stuff was going to do. You don't know. You just suddenly have this thing tearing at you, and you don't know what to do with it, because you can't remove the past and you can't replace it by something better. You can't do anything about it, and it's tearing you apart, and you don't know what to do with them, and you can't turn it against someone. You can't have a go at someone for no reason, and you can't have a go at your abusers because either they're gone or they're still coming back, and it's a murder, and you end up turning it in on yourself. And that's what you guys are all doing. You're turning this ripping thing, and you're turning it in on yourself because you don't know what the fuck else to do with it. You know, what are you meant to do? Break through a few mirrors? You can't. There's nothing you can do to actually get that tearing thing out and just break a curtain. Or anything. And there's nothing you can sort of do with it. So, oh guys, you've got to stop blaming yourself. It's called abuse for a reason. Okay. I did bite more than I could chew here, didn't I? Well, video requests please. I'm sorry that I couldn't do a couple of the video requests, they were just a little bit stuck. I've been requested though to do a video on Lee House and the expectations and meals and absolutely everything about Lee House, and I might do that video in a minute. First I'll cover the kind of things that that sort of all of the people in Lee House had to sort of stick to the rules by, and then I'll cover the things that the PEG programme had to stick by, which is the eating disorder group. So I'll talk to you guys about that. I miss talking to you guys. I miss your guys' comments. And guys, always feel free to talk to each other, because if you noticed on my videos, you pick up personalities when you see a few comments in a row from one person, and you guys should all talk to each other because you're really wonderful, supportive people, and sometimes I feel like you guys support each other more than I could support you. You're just beautiful. You're lovely, 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 lovely people, and I mean all of you, even you.